Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself stepping into another world. A world far older than our own, woven not with concrete and machines but with marble temples, sacred groves, and the hushed whispers of storytellers sitting around firelight. The night is calm, a warm breeze moving softly across olive branches, and above you, the stars burn with the same steady glow that the ancients once gazed upon. It is in this quiet, under this same eternal sky, that the stories of gods and goddesses, of vengeance and love, of betrayal and forgiveness, were told. Tonight, we will let one of those stories carry us away, not in a hurried fashion, not in the way myths are often recited as if they were only bullet points in a textbook, but slowly, gently, with pauses long enough to breathe. There is something strangely comforting about these old tales, even when they are filled with cruelty or tragedy. They remind us that humanity has always searched for meaning in the chaos of life, has always wrapped emotion and experience in the shape of divine figures. The goddess we focus on tonight is Hera, queen of the gods, ruler of Olympus beside her husband and brother Zeus. She was a figure of immense power, of majestic dignity, but also of deep wounds and furious retaliation. The mythology surrounding Hera is filled with contradictions. She is the patron of marriage and family, yet she is most famous for destroying those very bonds in others. She is revered as a protector, but feared for her merciless vengeance. To listen to Hera's myths is to step into the uncomfortable realization that even gods are shaped by jealousy, insecurity, and longing. But do not worry, this story is not told to alarm you. It is told to cradle your imagination, to let the ancient voices lull you into a rhythm of thought where history and myth become dreamlike. As you lie back and let your breathing grow slower, I will guide you through the tangled stories of Hera's revenge, one tale at a time, always with a gentle touch, as though we are walking together down a dimly lit temple corridor. Each section will unfurl not like a loud lecture, but like the low hum of a harp, notes rolling into each other until they fade softly into the distance. Our journey begins not with shouting battles of gods, but with the quiet acknowledgement that Hera's myths are, in their own way, bedtime stories. Not because they are soothing in content, but because they carry the weight of generations who spoke them aloud before sleep, perhaps to their children, perhaps to each other, perhaps to the darkness itself. Myth is memory, passed like a flame through countless nights, and when we listen now, we are not alone. We are joining an endless chain of listeners stretching back thousands of years. As we enter Hera's story, it is helpful to set aside the idea of heroes and villains. In mythology, the gods are not moral in the way we might expect. They do not embody perfection, nor do they punish only the guilty. They are raw expressions of human experience. Jealousy becomes divine wrath, love becomes divine obsession, cruelty becomes divine law. Hera's revenge, so often called messed up, is best understood not as random cruelty, but as the shadow of betrayal. When Zeus strayed from her, again and again, it was not simply a husband wounding a wife. It was the king of gods humiliating the queen of Olympus before the entire cosmos. Hera's rage, then, was not private, it was public, political, and cosmic in scale. Her enemies were not just Zeus's lovers, but any mortal or divine being that bore the mark of his faithlessness. And yet, even with all her fury, Hera remains fascinating because she is not one-dimensional. She is not only cruel. She is majestic, dignified, commanding. Entire cities built temples in her honor. Pilgrims carried offerings across seas for her blessing. Artists carved her in marble with calm, regal expressions, portraying her as the perfect counterpart to Zeus. This duality is what makes her story linger. How could the goddess of marriage, revered for centuries, also be the eternal enemy of so many mothers and children? How could the queen of Olympus, seated on a throne of gold, still be consumed by a pain so human it feels almost fragile? This is the paradox we will walk through together. Each tale will draw us deeper into Hera's character, her rage at the birth of Hercules, her relentless pursuit of the wandering Io, her cunning tricks against Semele, her rivalry with Leto, her heavy hand in the Trojan War. These stories are brutal, yes, but when told in the quiet rhythm of night, they become more than legends. They become mirrors of the struggles that families, lovers, and rivals have carried for centuries. As the stars continue to shine overhead, as you sink deeper into your blankets or your chair, Think of Hera not just as a goddess from a distant age, but as a figure embodying emotions you already know. You have felt jealousy. You have felt wounded pride. You have seen, perhaps, how anger can outlast even love. This is why her stories endure, not because they are alien, but because they are familiar. Wrapped in the fabric of myth, they feel larger than life, yet still touch the quietest corners of the human heart. So tonight, let us begin this long wandering journey, tracing Hera's revenge across centuries of storytelling. Let us move slowly, gently, and without judgment. As the myths unfold, remember that you are safe here, listening in the calm darkness, guided by the same voices that once echoed in temple halls and beside the sea. Hera's revenge is fierce, but in the telling, it softens into story. And in that softness, perhaps, you will find rest. If the first step into Hera's tale is understanding her contradictions, the second step is learning to hear these stories as the ancients did. Before we dive into gods and jealousies, let us first settle into the world of Greece itself, the setting where every whisper of myth once lived and breathed. To picture Hera clearly, we must picture her people. We must enter their nights, their landscapes, their quiet rituals beneath an ancient sky. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a sacred grove in the Peloponnese. The cicadas sing softly, their chorus blending with the rustle of olive leaves in the breeze. Beyond the trees, marble columns rise like pale ghosts, remnants of a temple bathed in moonlight. This is Greece, not a Greece of tourist maps or crowded cities, but the ancient Greece of memory and imagination, where every stone and every star carried meaning. The land itself was alive with stories. Every river had a spirit, every hill could be a resting place of a god, every cave a threshold between the mortal and the divine. For the Greeks, myth was not entertainment. It was life. It explained the storm that battered their ships at sea. It explained why one child thrived and another fell ill. It gave meaning to the endless cycles of planting and harvest, love and betrayal, birth and death. To listen to myths was not a distraction before sleep, it was a way of anchoring oneself in a universe that felt immense and unpredictable. If Zeus thundered in the skies, the people bowed their heads not in metaphor, but in genuine awe. If Hera's wrath fell upon a woman, that tale carried a lesson to every listener: beware of pride, beware of betrayal, beware of drawing the eyes of the gods. The nights of Greece were filled with these voices. Around firesides, fishermen told tales to calm the fears of waves and winds. In courtyards, elders recited stories so children would fall asleep with visions of heroes and gods instead of nightmares. Priests spoke myths in temples not just as sermons, but as performances of sacred memory. In this world, Hera was not a distant name on a page, she was present in the smoke of incense, in the vows spoken at weddings, in the fear and reverence of every wife who wondered if her husband might stray. To sink deeper into this setting, let us walk through the places where Hera was most honored. In the island of Samos, her temple stood as one of the grandest sanctuaries of antiquity. Pilgrims crossed seas to bring offerings, laying wreaths and libations at her feet. In Argos, her worshippers considered her the protector of their city, the heart of their civic pride. She was not only a character in myth but a living goddess, honored in processions, sacrifices, and songs. To walk through these places was to feel her presence woven into the very stone. Imagine the flicker of torchlight across the carved reliefs of her temple, shadows dancing like silent attendants at her side. It is important to slow down here, to remember that these were not abstract stories scribbled into books. They were living breath, spoken aloud in communities where the gods felt only a whisper away. To the ancient listener, Hera's revenge was not only the drama of Olympus, it was a reminder that life itself could change at the whim of forces beyond comprehension. And so they told these stories softly, repetitively, each retelling anchoring the lesson deeper into memory. Close your eyes again and let yourself drift through an Aegean night. Picture the sea, black and endless, reflecting the scattered light of constellations. Somewhere on a hillside, a family sits together while an elder begins a tale. Perhaps the children are restless, perhaps the parents are weary from the day's labor, but all fall silent when the story begins. The name of Hera is spoken with care. The elder's voice moves slowly, with pauses long enough for the fire to crackle and the night wind to fill the gaps. For them, these tales were not rushed. They were meant to flow like rivers, bending and circling, eventually leading the listener to sleep, to dreams shaped by the gods themselves. And this is how we will listen tonight. Not with urgency. Not with the expectation of reaching an ending quickly. But with the patience of those ancients, who could linger in the details of a story as long as it took for the stars to cross the sky. To them, the gods were as real as the constellations above, and their tales as soothing and inevitable as the rhythm of the waves. So, when we speak of Hera's revenge, remember that it was not told in a world like ours, crowded with noise and distraction. It was told in a world where silence had weight, where every sound echoed against mountains and sea, where the stars seemed close enough to touch. In that quiet, Hera was not simply a myth. She was a presence, a queen whose pride could shake kingdoms and whose sorrow could outlast centuries. We will step into that world slowly, carefully, allowing its atmosphere to wash over us. Hera's temples, Hera's worshippers, the very air of ancient Greece, all of these shaped the way her stories were told. They remind us that mythology is not separate from the people who carried it. To understand Hera's revenge, we must first understand the land that gave her form, the nights that gave her voice, and the listeners who kept her stories alive across generations. Now, the stage is set. The world of ancient Greece lies open before us. The groves, the temples, the firelit courtyards, the sea under stars. It is here, in this sacred atmosphere, that we can begin to follow Hera herself, queen of gods, goddess of marriage, and figure of a rage so old and so enduring that it still whispers to us now, across thousands of years. To understand Hera's revenge, we must first understand Hera herself. Before the storms of jealousy, before the tangled rivalries, she was the queen of Olympus. The image of Hera that lingers through mythology is not only of a wrathful goddess but of a majestic figure, draped in royal dignity, seated on a golden throne beside her husband, Zeus. She was not a minor deity, not a passing presence in the grand orchestra of Greek myth. She was one of the great Olympians, one of the eldest, and her power touched both gods and mortals alike. In the hierarchy of Olympus, Hera's place was undeniable. She was the daughter of Cronus and Rhea, making her a sibling to Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, and Hestia. Like her brothers and sisters, she had been swallowed at birth by Cronus, who feared the prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him. Only when Zeus rose up against his father and freed his siblings did Hera step into her destiny. From that moment onward, she was not simply another goddess, she was the consort of the king of gods, the embodiment of divine queenship. Imagine Hera as the ancients did, adorned with a crown, scepter in hand, robes flowing like clouds. She was the personification of majesty itself, an unshakable symbol of marriage, family, and order. Her sacred animals reflected her royal nature, the cow, symbol of nurturing and motherhood, and the peacock, whose dazzling feathers shimmered with the eyes of watchfulness. When worshippers looked upon a peacock, they did not simply see a bird, they saw Hera's presence, her beauty and vigilance made manifest in living color. To her followers, Hera was far more than the jealous goddess of myths. She was the divine protector of women, the patron of marriages, the one invoked in ceremonies of union and childbirth. Couples called upon her to bless their vows, to shield them from misfortune. Cities built temples of breathtaking scale in her honor, none more famous than the Heraion of Samos, one of the largest temples in all of Greece, where pilgrims brought offerings across the seas. In Argos, another of her great centers, she was worshipped as the heart of civic pride, her name woven into the very identity of the people. And yet, beneath this image of grandeur, there was always a shadow. Hera's myths are defined not by her calm protection but by her fierce retaliation. How does one reconcile these two sides of her nature, the nurturing queen and the relentless avenger? Perhaps the answer lies in the contradictions of her own domain. Marriage, after all, is a bond of trust, yet also a place where betrayal can cut deepest. To guard marriage was to guard against betrayal, and when betrayal came, Hera's fury was as boundless as her authority. This is why Hera is such a compelling figure to the modern ear. Unlike some gods, who embody simple forces of nature, Poseidon as the sea, Apollo as the sun, Hera embodies a human experience. She is the pain of being betrayed, the pride of being humiliated before others, the cold persistence of jealousy that refuses to fade. She is not perfect, not noble in every tale, but she is relatable in her flaws. When we hear of her anger at Zeus's countless affairs, it is not difficult to imagine the sting of disloyalty, magnified 1,000 times over when played out on the cosmic stage of Olympus. Still, one must remember that in myth, Hera is more than a wronged wife. She is power incarnate. To oppose Hera was to invite ruin. Her punishments were not fleeting but enduring. She was capable of crafting torment so persistent that entire generations could suffer beneath her vengeance. And yet, she was also capable of mercy and grace, capable of blessing unions and ensuring prosperity. She was a goddess of contradictions, regal yet wounded, dignified yet relentless. If you were an ancient listener, lying in the dark while an elder recited these tales, Hera would not be a distant name but a presence hovering over your own household. If you were married, you might hope for her blessing, offering sacrifices at her temple so that your bond would remain strong. If you were unfaithful, you might fear her eyes upon you, her wrath waiting patiently, inevitably. To live in her world was to live under constant awareness of her influence. The myths that survive to us often emphasize her vengeance because they make for dramatic tales. They pit her against Zeus's lovers and children, casting her as a relentless adversary. But we should not let those stories erase the devotion she inspired. When the people of Samos raised her colossal temple, when Argive priests offered sacrifices in her honor, they did not do so because she was cruel. They did so because she was queenly, sacred, and necessary. To them, Hera was balance. Without her, Zeus's unchecked power might have spiraled into chaos. Hera was not only a goddess of jealousy, she was the goddess who kept the divine order intact. In her, we see both the beauty and the messiness of mythology. The ancients did not shy away from complexity. They did not demand that their gods be flawless. Instead, they wove into them the very struggles that shape human life. Hera is thus not only a character in stories of revenge, she is a reminder that even the highest throne carries the weight of doubt, of betrayal, of sorrow. And in that way, her story is not only divine but deeply human. As we drift deeper into her world, let us hold this dual image of Hera in our minds, the crowned queen seated in majesty, and the wounded wife whose fury could shake Olympus. Both are true. Both are hers. To understand her revenge, we must understand her pride, her dignity, her unwavering demand to be seen and respected as queen. Only then can we follow her through the tangled labyrinth of myths that defined her, myths of jealousy, of punishment, and of endless, burning pride. With the queen now seated before us in all her majesty and contradiction, the stage is set for the union that would define her mythology most of all, her marriage to Zeus, the king of gods. A marriage both divine and broken, filled with moments of grandeur and wounds that would never heal. It is here, in that union, that Hera's revenge begins to take shape. The story of Hera cannot be told without telling the story of her marriage to Zeus. To the Greeks, this was not only a divine union but the very model of cosmic order, the king and queen of Olympus ruling side by side. And yet, for all its majesty, theirs was a union scarred by betrayal, discord, and a cycle of wounds that never healed. It was both sacred and fractured, and in that contradiction, Hera's revenge found its roots. When Zeus first courted Hera, he did so with persistence. Myths tell us that Hera resisted him at first. Perhaps she foresaw the storm that would follow, or perhaps she simply wished to guard her dignity. Zeus, clever and relentless, disguised himself as a cuckoo bird during a storm. Shivering in the rain, the bird sought refuge in Hera's embrace. As soon as she drew it close, Zeus revealed his true form, pressing his claim with overwhelming force. Some versions of the myth say she yielded reluctantly, others that she was tricked into marriage. However the tale is told, the message is the same. Their marriage began not in harmony, but in tension. From that moment on, Hera was queen of Olympus. She wore the crown, she sat beside Zeus, and her authority was unquestioned among the gods. Yet behind the shining facade of their divine marriage lay a constant source of bitterness, Zeus's endless infidelity. Time and again, he strayed from Hera, disguising himself as animals, as mortals, even as golden rain, in order to pursue lovers across the earth. And time and again, Hera discovered his betrayals. Imagine her throne room on Olympus, golden halls filled with light, servants attending her, other gods bowing in respect. Outwardly, she was regal, untouchable. But in the shadows of her heart, there was always another wound opening, another betrayal revealed, another whisper of Zeus's wandering desires. How does a queen respond when the king himself undermines the very bond she represents? Hera's answer was not silence, not submission. It was resistance, often cruel, often unrelenting, but always fueled by the fire of humiliation. The Greeks did not soften these stories. They told them with all their sharp edges. Zeus's affairs produced children, heroes, demigods, gods themselves, and Hera, unable to strike Zeus directly, turned her fury upon those who reminded her of his betrayal. She became the scourge of his lovers, the eternal adversary of his children. To modern ears, it may sound unjust to punish the innocent. Yet in the mythic imagination of the Greeks, Hera's rage was inevitable, as unyielding as a storm. She embodied the truth that betrayal in marriage does not wound in silence. It erupts, it lashes outward, it seeks retribution. And yet, even in the midst of their discord, Zeus and Hera's bond endured. Their quarrels were legendary, but so was their connection. In some myths, they reconciled with tenderness. In others, they fought so fiercely that the entire cosmos trembled. There is a tale that once, enraged by Zeus, Hera conspired with other gods to overthrow him. They bound him in chains while he slept. But when Briareus, one of the 100-handed giants, rushed to free Zeus, his power returned, and Hera's rebellion was crushed. As punishment, Zeus suspended her in the sky with golden chains, left to hang between heaven and earth. Imagine the humiliation of the queen, swaying helplessly, her dignity torn apart. And yet, she endured. She returned to her throne. She remained his consort. This cycle, betrayal, anger, punishment, reconciliation, became the rhythm of their marriage. For the ancients, it was not merely scandalous, it was symbolic. Their union represented the paradox of life itself, that love and strife are woven together, that harmony and discord cannot be separated. In Hera and Zeus, the Greeks saw both the stability of order and the inevitability of conflict. To tell these tales at night, in the soft cadence of storytelling, is to see the humanity hidden in the gods. Have we not known marriages touched by betrayal? Have we not seen pride wounded, promises broken, and love carried on in spite of it all? Hera's fury, though divine in scale, was rooted in a pain that every listener could recognize. And Zeus's unfaithfulness, though cosmic in its consequences, echoed the flaws of countless mortal men. Still, Hera was not only a victim. She was a strategist, a force of will, a goddess who refused to fade into the shadow of her husband. Her acts of vengeance were also acts of defiance, reminders to Olympus that she was no passive consort but a queen who could not be dismissed. When Zeus brought new children into the world, Hera raised her hand against them, asserting her presence in every story where she might otherwise have been forgotten. In this way, her revenge became her voice, her enduring mark on myth. Picture her, then, not simply as a wronged wife but as a figure of immense strength. A woman who knew the weight of betrayal but would not let it silence her. A queen who bore chains but never surrendered her throne. Even when humiliated, she returned with dignity. Even when mocked by Zeus's endless affairs, she remained his equal, his partner, his eternal counterpart. Their union was a paradox, broken yet unbreakable, bitter yet inseparable. As you let these images drift through your mind, consider how the ancients might have heard them. Not as gossip about gods, but as reflections of their own lives, their own struggles. In Hera and Zeus, they saw the dangers of pride, the pain of jealousy, the fragility of trust. They also saw the endurance of bonds that, though imperfect, could not be severed. And so, when we step into Hera's revenge, it is not from the perspective of a villainess lashing out without reason. It is from the perspective of a queen, wounded again and again, who found power in her fury. Their marriage is the root of it all, the divine union that was meant to represent order, yet instead birthed chaos. Hera's revenge cannot be understood without understanding this tension, this endless cycle of betrayal and retaliation. Now, with Hera seated beside Zeus, their crowns gleaming in the light of Olympus, The stage is prepared for the conflicts that will shape the rest of her myths. For soon Zeus's wandering heart will find new mortal loves, and from those unions will come children destined for greatness. But with every birth, Hera will rise again, her wrath sharp as steel, her patience exhausted. Among these stories, none is more famous, nor more tragic, than the birth of Hercules, the child whose very existence would ignite Hera's most relentless vengeance. To understand Hera's place in mythology, we must pause and reflect on something larger than any one goddess, any one story. We must reflect on the theme of revenge itself. Across cultures, across centuries, revenge appears again and again, as if it is stitched into the very fabric of human storytelling. It is a theme both unsettling and strangely familiar, one that speaks to a deep part of the human heart. And in the myths of the Greeks, no figure embodies this more clearly than Hera. Think of the stories you may already know from other traditions. In Norse sagas, vengeance drives heroes across frozen seas. In the epics of India, insults and betrayals fuel wars that last generations. In the Bible, vengeance is spoken of as divine justice, an eye for an eye. And in countless folktales, wrongs demand righting, slights demand repayment, and balance must be restored, no matter the cost. Revenge is universal. It is one of those themes that appear wherever humans tell stories, perhaps because it is an emotion we all understand. To be wronged is to feel a fire inside, a restless stirring that demands some kind of answer. For the Greeks, revenge was not only personal, it was cosmic. They believed the universe itself demanded balance. If pride grew too large, it had to be cut down. If a crime was committed, it had to be punished. The goddess Nemesis personified this idea, carrying her scales and ensuring that no arrogance went unchecked. Yet revenge was not always just. Sometimes it spiraled out of control, consuming generations in endless cycles of retaliation. The house of Atreus, cursed by betrayals and murders, shows how vengeance could poison entire lineages. For the Greeks, revenge was both terrifying and inevitable. Within this framework, Hera becomes a fascinating figure. She is not vengeance in the abstract, like Nemesis, but vengeance embodied in the form of a goddess who has been wronged, humiliated, and betrayed. Her revenge is not cosmic law, it is personal, emotional, deeply human. That is what makes her stories so powerful. She is not punishing strangers for arrogance, she is punishing the women who lay with her husband, the children who remind her of his faithlessness. Her fury is intimate, and for that reason, it feels all the more unsettling. At the same time, Hera's vengeance is strangely relatable. Listeners across the centuries may not have shared her divine throne, but they knew what it was like to feel betrayed. They knew the sting of jealousy, the ache of pride wounded in public. When Hera lashes out, the Greeks saw not just a goddess acting from malice, but a mirror of their own emotions, magnified on a divine scale. This is why her stories endured. They touched upon emotions so raw, so deeply embedded in human experience, that they could not be forgotten. And yet, here is the paradox: revenge in myths often fails to bring peace. Instead of closure, it creates more suffering, more violence, more tragedy. Hera's vengeance rarely ends in satisfaction. She hounds Io across the earth, but the girl continues to wander. She drives Hercules to madness, but he emerges as one of the greatest heroes of Greece. Again and again, her punishments ripple outward, shaping destinies far beyond her control. The stories remind us of a painful truth: vengeance may feel necessary, but it rarely heals. It perpetuates, it multiplies, it spreads like fire in dry grass. As we listen now, softly, calmly, in the quiet of the night, we can see the shape of revenge as the ancients saw it. It was a force to be feared, a force to be respected, a force that could not easily be stopped once it began. Hera was not alone in this. The Furies, those terrifying spirits of vengeance, pursued anyone guilty of crimes against family. Achilles' rage in the Iliad is essentially vengeance for the death of his beloved Patroclus. Odysseus, when he returns to Ithaca, slaughters the suitors in an act of long-delayed revenge. The Greeks did not shy away from vengeance. They accepted it as one of the driving engines of the world. But Hera's stories give revenge a particular face. A queen's face. A woman's face. They show us how vengeance feels when it comes not from distant law, but from the intimacy of a broken marriage. Zeus could command thunder and hurl lightning, but Hera's power was subtler, more enduring. She was patient in her vengeance, relentless over years, even lifetimes. If Zeus's anger was a sudden storm, Hera's was a slow, unending winter. Both were terrifying, but Hera's lingered long after the thunder faded. This is why the Greeks described her as both majestic and dangerous. To pray to Hera was to seek her blessing, but also to avoid her wrath. One wrong word, one act of betrayal, and her vengeance could unfold in ways impossible to escape. And yet, perhaps beneath the fear, there was also understanding. For what is revenge but an attempt to make sense of pain, to restore dignity, to assert control in a world where love and loyalty often slip away? As you listen to these stories in the quiet of the night, notice how softly the theme of revenge threads through them. It is not a loud clamor but a constant hum, like the background music of myth itself. Revenge is the rhythm of Hera's story, the heartbeat that carries her forward. Without it, her myths would lose their shape. With it, they become unforgettable, complex, haunting. And so, before we enter the specific tales of Hera's wrath, it is important to hold this theme gently in your mind. Revenge, in mythology, is not just punishment. It is a cycle, a weight, a force that binds gods and mortals alike. For Hera, it is the lens through which we see her not merely as a goddess of marriage, but as a figure consumed by the pain of betrayal. Revenge is her legacy, her story, her voice in the great chorus of myth. Now, with this understanding in place, we can turn to one of the most pivotal stories in her mythology, the birth of a child who would become her greatest rival, her most enduring source of wrath. That child was Hercules, son of Zeus and a mortal woman, whose very existence was the spark that set Hera's vengeance ablaze. The story of Hercules, the greatest of all Greek heroes, does not begin with glory, or strength, or triumph. It begins, instead, with betrayal. For Hera, it begins with the familiar sting of Zeus's infidelity, a wound she had felt too many times before. Yet this time, the wound cut deeper than most, for the child born of this union would become not only a reminder of her husband's disloyalty, but also the focus of her enduring wrath. To tell the story of Hercules is to tell the story of Hera's vengeance, woven through his life from birth to death. The mother of this child was a mortal woman named Alcmene, a figure both respected and admired. Alcmene was renowned in her city of Thebes for her beauty, but also for her noble heart and her devotion to her husband, Amphitryon. In many tales, she was portrayed as a paragon of virtue, the kind of woman who seemed untouchable by scandal. But Zeus, in his restless hunger for conquest not only in battle but in love, cast his eyes upon her. What follows is one of the many disturbing patterns in Greek mythology, Zeus disguising himself to deceive, seduce, or overpower women. For Alcmene, he took on a crueler trick. The stories tell us that Zeus disguised himself as Amphitryon, returning from war. Alcmene, believing it was her husband, welcomed him into her arms. What followed was a night said to be longer than any ordinary night, stretched by Zeus himself to last 3 days. From this union, Hercules was conceived. For Hera, who already watched Zeus's wandering eyes with bitterness, this was more than an affair. It was a violation of her sacred role as goddess of marriage, a reminder that even her divine authority could not restrain her husband's appetites. Alcmene, unaware at first of the deception, soon faced the wrath of Hera, though she had done nothing wrong. Hera's anger was not directed at Zeus, at least, not openly. Instead, it was focused on the mortal woman who had carried his child. This is one of the cruelest patterns in Hera's myths. Her fury often fell upon the women and children caught in Zeus's web, rather than upon Zeus himself. Perhaps this was because Zeus was too powerful to punish, or perhaps because her anger toward him was so vast, so impossible to resolve, that it spilled outward onto those who symbolized his betrayals. When the time for Hercules' birth came, Hera's revenge stirred into action. In some versions, she sent the goddess of childbirth, Eileithyia, to delay the delivery. Alcmene suffered, trapped in endless labor pains, as Hera sought to prevent the child from ever entering the world. In other accounts, Hera even arranged for Eurystheus, another child of Zeus born around the same time, to be delivered prematurely. By delaying Heracles's birth and hastening Eurystheus's, Hera ensured that Eurystheus would become king, while Heracles would live under his command. From the moment of his birth, Hera sought to humiliate him, to rob him of glory, to shape his life as one of servitude rather than triumph. But destiny is a force stronger even than divine jealousy. Despite Hera's schemes, Heracles was born. His very name tells us something important. Heracles means the glory of Hera. It is an ironic name, perhaps even a mocking one. Some suggest it was meant to appease the goddess, to honor her in hopes that she might spare the child her anger. Instead, the name became a reminder of her presence in his story, her shadow looming over him, her wrath shaping the very path of his life. Heracles would indeed bring Hera glory, but not in the way mortals intended. His suffering, his labors, his endless struggles, all would testify to her power, even as his victories defied her. As an infant, Heracles was already marked by Hera's vengeance. One of the most famous tales tells of how she sent serpents into his cradle. Imagine the scene: a quiet night, the household asleep, and suddenly, snakes slithering toward the child, their eyes glinting in the dim light. Alcmene and Amphitryon were terrified, but little Heracles, not yet able to walk or speak, grasped the serpents in his tiny hands and crushed them. It was the first sign of his superhuman strength, the first hint that this child was no ordinary mortal. Yet even in his cradle, his life was one of danger, haunted by the malice of the queen of Olympus. Why did Hera direct her fury so fiercely at this child? Perhaps because Heracles represented everything she despised. He was living proof of Zeus's betrayal, a reminder that her authority as the goddess of marriage could be mocked and defied. He was also a child destined for greatness, a greatness that might eclipse her own. For Hera, to let Heracles rise unchallenged was unthinkable. And so she made his life into a trial, his every triumph into a struggle against obstacles she placed in his path. This story also reveals something essential about Hera's character. Her vengeance was not momentary, not a passing flash of temper. It was enduring, patient, relentless. From the moment of Heracles's conception to the end of his days, she pursued him. Her vengeance was not a storm that raged and faded, but a steady flame, burning year after year. And so, as Heracles grew into manhood, he carried with him this strange dual legacy, the gift of divine strength from his father, and the curse of unending hostility from his father's wife. His life would be a balance between these two forces, shaped as much by Hera's hatred as by his own heroism. In the quiet of the night, as we retell this story, it becomes clear that Heracles's greatness cannot be separated from Hera's wrath. Without her vengeance, there would be no labors, no epic struggles, no stories to inspire or across the centuries. Hera sought to destroy him, but in doing so, she forged his legend. Their fates were bound together, adversaries locked in a dance that neither could escape. And so, the birth of Heracles was not simply the arrival of a hero. It was the opening of a lifelong conflict, a spark that would ignite countless tales of suffering, triumph, and revenge. For Hera, it was the moment her vengeance found its greatest target. For Heracles, it was the beginning of a destiny shaped as much by hatred as by love. The story of the serpents in the cradle is one of the earliest and most vivid tales from the life of Heracles, and it is also one of the clearest demonstrations of Hera's relentless wrath. Imagine the scene, quiet and still, in a chamber where a newborn child sleeps. Outside, the world carries on in hushed tones, but inside, the air is heavy with divine tension. The child, only a few months old, rests beneath soft coverings, his small breath steady in the night. Yet the calm is an illusion, for Hera's anger has not subsided since his birth. If anything, it has grown sharper, as though the very sight of the infant fuels her desire for retribution. Hera, queen of Olympus, would not allow this child to grow without challenge. In her mind, he was a living insult to her marriage, a reminder of Zeus's betrayal, a threat to her honor. And so she devised a test, a cruel act meant not only to end his life but to send a message, that no child born of Zeus's unfaithfulness could escape her vengeance. She summoned two great serpents, symbols of her power and fury, and sent them slithering into the chamber where the infant Heracles lay. The imagery is striking. In the dark, the snakes glide across the floor, their scales whispering against the stone. Their tongues flicker in the air, tasting the scent of the child. Their eyes glint like small, malevolent stars. In Greek myth, serpents often carried an ominous presence, creatures of cunning, danger, and divine punishment. To send them against an infant was to blend terror with inevitability, for who could imagine a newborn fending off such a threat? Hera believed this was the end of Hercules' story before it had even begun. But myth delights in surprises, in the overturning of expectations. And so the child stirred in his cradle, not with cries of fear but with strength that should not have belonged to one so small. As the serpents reared back, ready to strike, Hercules reached out his hands, tiny hands, yet filled with the force of a god's blood. He grasped each serpent by the throat, and with astonishing power, he squeezed. The creatures writhed, twisted, and struggled, but the infant's grip was unyielding. In moments, their bodies fell limp, crushed by the hands of the child they were meant to destroy. It was a miracle and a sign. Those who witnessed the scene were filled with awe, for it was clear that this was no ordinary boy. Alcmene, his mother, rushed to his side, both terrified and astonished, while Amphitryon, his mortal father, looked on in disbelief. To see a child not yet able to walk or speak perform an act of such raw strength was a revelation. It meant that Hercules was destined for greatness, but it also meant that his life would never be ordinary. Hera had tested him, and instead of ending his life, she had revealed his power to the world. In many retellings, this moment is described not only as a sign of Hercules' strength but also as an omen of his future struggles. The serpents symbolized the challenges that would follow him throughout his life, dangers sent by Hera, obstacles meant to crush him, trials designed to break him. Yet just as he crushed the serpents in his cradle, he would go on to face monsters, labors, and torments with the same relentless strength. The cradle became the first battlefield of his destiny, and Hera, in her hatred, had unknowingly shaped the legend that would define him. For the Greeks, this story carried layers of meaning. On one hand, it was a tale of divine wrath and miraculous survival, meant to awe and inspire. On another, it was a reflection of the human condition. How often do we find ourselves tested before we are ready, challenged before we have grown strong enough, thrown into struggles we did not choose? Hercules' first trial came in infancy, before he could even speak his name. In this way, he became a symbol for all of us, embodying the idea that life does not wait for us to be prepared, it demands strength from us, even when we are still fragile. For Hera, however, this moment was not a defeat but a bitter prelude. The serpent's death did not soften her heart, nor did it cause her to reconsider her vengeance. Instead, it deepened her resolve. If a child could survive such a test, then greater trials would be required. If Hercules could not be destroyed in his cradle, then his entire life would have to become a battlefield. Hera was patient, and she would find other ways to bring him suffering. This was only the beginning. The story of the serpents also reflects something of the Greek fascination with omens and signs. For those who believed in fate, every extraordinary event carried meaning. To see an infant destroy serpents was not just a feat of strength, it was a message from the gods, a signal that Hercules' path would be unlike any other. Some might have seen it as a blessing, proof that Zeus's son was destined for glory. Others might have seen it as a curse, for what kind of life begins with a battle against death? Both interpretations held truth, for Hercules' life would be filled with both glory and suffering, triumph and torment. In the quiet of bedtime reflection, the story takes on an almost dreamlike quality. The cradle, the serpents, the small hands closing around them, it feels both terrifying and strangely reassuring. For even in the darkest moments, even when danger seemed inevitable, the child prevailed. It is a reminder that strength sometimes reveals itself when least expected, that even in moments of vulnerability, resilience can emerge. And so, the serpents in the cradle are more than just an early adventure. They are a symbol of the lifelong struggle between Hera and Hercules, a struggle that began not in battlefields or palaces, but in the soft innocence of infancy. Hera had tried to extinguish his life, but in doing so, she gave him his first story of triumph, the first chapter of a legend that would grow beyond her control. This moment, small yet monumental, set the stage for everything that followed. From here, Hercules would grow, trained in skill and strength, haunted by Hera's malice, and prepared for trials that would define his name. The serpents had failed, but Hera would not stop. The queen of Olympus would wait, watching, ready to strike again when the time was right. The story of Heracles moves from infancy into childhood, and with it, Hera's quiet shadow lengthens. For most children, early years are marked by games, by simple joys, by the gentle lessons of family and community. But for Heracles, those years were marked by an unusual weight. From the very beginning, he carried both the gift of divine strength and the burden of divine hostility. Even as he learned to walk and speak, Hera's influence hovered over him, shaping the challenges of his youth. In many versions of the myth, Heracles' mortal family recognized early on that he was different. Amphitryon, though not his true father, took responsibility for raising him and saw in him the signs of Zeus's bloodline. Alcmene, his mother, knew both pride and sorrow as she watched her son grow. Pride, because his strength and vigor marked him as a child destined for greatness. Sorrow, because she also knew that Hera's wrath would never allow him an ordinary life. It must have been a strange thing, raising a boy who could do what grown men could not, yet who was destined for endless conflict. The Greeks loved to imagine the training of young heroes, and Heracles was no exception. His childhood is described as a time of instruction under various teachers, each attempting to instill in him the skills expected of a noble youth. He was taught music and the lyre, but his strength often made such delicate arts difficult. In one famous story, when his teacher struck him for his clumsiness, the boy lashed out in anger, accidentally killing the man with a single blow. It was a shocking moment, one that revealed both the danger and the tragedy of his extraordinary power. Even in learning, even in the innocence of youth, Hera's influence seemed to whisper in the background, turning moments of discipline into accidents of violence. Heracles was also instructed in archery, wrestling, and the art of war. Here, his gifts flourished. His teachers quickly realized that his body was designed for strength, that his arms carried a force far beyond mortal limits. He could pin grown men with ease, draw bows that others could not string, and endure training that would have exhausted his peers. To some, this was awe-inspiring. To others, it was unsettling. How could a boy be so powerful, and what would it mean for his future? The myths suggest that even those who admired him also feared him, for power on such a scale is rarely without consequence. Hera's role during these years was subtle but persistent. She did not strike with thunder or flame. Instead, she seemed to arrange small tragedies, small reminders of her presence. A moment of rage that ended a life, a quarrel that escalated too far, an accident that revealed the danger of his strength, each of these events carried the trace of her malice. Heracles' youth was not marked by peace but by constant tests, as though Hera was always probing, always pressing, always reminding him that his existence came at her expense. The Greeks, in telling these stories, often emphasized how fate shaped heroes from the earliest moments. For Heracles, fate and Hera worked hand in hand. His strength was his gift, his divine inheritance from Zeus. But Hera's hostility ensured that this gift would never bring him ease. Instead, it set him apart, isolated him from others, and marked him as someone who would live not in comfort, but in trial. The more he revealed his strength, the more Hera found ways to twist it into tragedy. One can imagine the loneliness of such a childhood. To be too strong for one's peers, to carry the guilt of actions committed without malice, to be feared as much as admired, this was the foundation of Heracles' youth. He must have longed for acceptance, for a moment free from Hera's gaze, but such peace was denied him. Even before his great labors, his life was already shaped by sorrow and struggle. In some versions, Hera's influence even extended to his education in morality. The Greeks told a symbolic tale, known as the choice of Heracles. As a young man, he was said to have been visited by two women, personifications of two paths. One was virtue, promising a life of hardship but also honor and glory. The other was vice, offering a life of ease, pleasure, and indulgence. Heracles chose virtue, a choice consistent with his destiny as a hero. Though this story may not have been literally tied to Hera, her presence is felt in it nonetheless. By making his life a constant struggle, she had already set him on the path of hardship, forcing him toward the road of glory through suffering. In the soft quiet of storytelling, These details of Heracles' youth feel almost dreamlike. They are fragments, scattered tales of teachers, accidents, and early trials. Yet when pieced together, they reveal a pattern: Hera's invisible hand guiding his growth, shaping his destiny, ensuring that even as a child he would never escape the burden of her anger. The boy who strangled serpents in his cradle became the youth who could not play the lyre without tragedy, who could not train without showing a strength that frightened others. Every step of his early life bore the mark of Hera's shadow. And yet, within this shadow, Heracles grew. His strength became not just physical but emotional, forged in the loneliness of being different, in the sorrow of being misunderstood. By the time he reached manhood, he was already tempered by struggle. Hera had sought to break him in his youth, but in doing so, she had prepared him for the greater trials that awaited. His childhood, difficult and tragic though it was, became the foundation for his legend. So when we look back upon the youth of Heracles, we see not only a boy growing into a man, but a goddess weaving her vengeance through every moment. Hera could not stop his birth, and she could not end his life with serpents. Instead, she shaped his destiny in subtler ways, ensuring that from his earliest years, his life was defined by struggle. And in that struggle, Heracles became the figure we still remember, the hero of strength, the sufferer of trials, the man whose story is inseparable from the wrath of a goddess. If Hera's wrath had shaped Heracles' infancy and youth, then it was in adulthood that she struck her most terrible blow. It is here, in the story of Heracles' madness, that the true cruelty of her vengeance is revealed, not through serpents or childhood misfortunes, but through the breaking of the hero's very mind. For a man whose body could overcome lions and giants, the greatest wound would not be physical. It would be a wound of the spirit, a torment that turned his own strength against the ones he loved. By the time Heracles reached manhood, he had already proven himself a hero in the eyes of mortals. His feats of strength, his victories in battle, and his noble bearing had earned him admiration. He married Megara, the daughter of the Theban king Creon, and together they had children. For a time, it seemed as though Hera's shadow might have lessened. The hero had a family, a home, a life filled with joy and purpose. In these quiet years, perhaps Heracles imagined that he might escape the curse of Hera's vengeance, that love and peace might shield him from divine hostility. But Hera was patient. Her vengeance was not quick, not fleeting, but enduring. She waited, watching, until the moment came when she could strike in a way that would wound him most deeply. To kill him outright would have been too simple. To strip away his strength would have been too merciful. Instead, she sought to destroy the very foundation of his happiness, to twist his love into ruin. And so, in a moment both tragic and terrifying, Hera clouded Heracles' mind with madness. The myths describe this in different ways. Some say she sent a fit of rage upon him, a sudden blindness of reason that consumed his thoughts. Others describe it as a kind of possession, his senses overwhelmed by divine fury, his will no longer his own. In the quiet of the night, one can imagine it as a creeping shadow slipping into his mind, filling him with confusion and rage, until he no longer knew friend from foe. What followed was one of the most heartbreaking episodes in all of Greek mythology. In his madness, Heracles turned upon his own family. He saw his children not as the innocents they were, but as enemies, threats conjured by the haze of Hera's influence. Megara, his beloved wife, could not stop him. His strength, so often a gift to protect and defend, became a weapon of destruction. One by one, in a frenzy of divine madness, Heracles killed his children, and in some versions, even Megara herself. When the haze lifted, and the madness passed, Heracles awoke to horror. Imagine the silence of that moment, the stillness of a home once filled with laughter and life, now broken by grief. The bodies of his children lay before him, and the realization crashed down like thunder. He, the great protector, the strong hero, the defender of the weak, had become the destroyer of his own family. No monster, no enemy, no army had done this. It was his own hands, guided by the cruel vengeance of Hera. The Greeks saw in this moment a profound tragedy. For them, Heracles was not just a hero of strength, he was also a symbol of suffering. His life was not simply one of triumph, but of pain and redemption. This story of madness revealed the fragility of human life, the way even the strongest among us can be undone not by external enemies but by forces within, by grief, by rage, by confusion. In Heracles's case, those forces were amplified by the will of a goddess determined to see him broken. Hera's vengeance here was complete in its cruelty. By forcing Heracles to destroy those he loved most, she ensured that his suffering would be lifelong. Monsters could be slain, serpents could be crushed, but the guilt of such an act could never be undone. His triumphs in the future would always be shadowed by this memory, this wound carved into his soul. For Hera, it was the perfect punishment, not death, but unending sorrow. Yet in Greek mythology, suffering often leads to transformation. The death of his family did not end Heracles' story, it reshaped it. Stricken with grief, the hero sought purification. He turned to the oracle of Delphi, asking how he might atone for his terrible deeds. It was there that the path of the 12 labors was laid before him, a series of impossible tasks that would test him beyond imagination. These labors would become his legend, the stories we remember most vividly, but they were born from tragedy. Without Hera's vengeance, there would have been no labors, no epic struggles to define him. His greatness was forged in suffering, his glory in grief. As we reflect on this moment in the soft cadence of bedtime storytelling, it feels both sorrowful and strangely inevitable. Heracles was always destined to struggle, and Hera was always destined to shape his trials. The madness was the darkest of her blows, yet it was also the spark that set him on the path to immortality. Without this tragedy, there would be no redemption, no arc of transformation from sinner to hero. And so, the story reminds us of something universal. Even the strongest can falter. Even the mightiest can fall victim to forces beyond their control. Heracles' madness is a myth, but it speaks to truths we recognize, that love can be fragile, that happiness can be fleeting, that pain often arrives without warning. Yet it also suggests that from the depths of despair, a new path can emerge. From the ashes of grief, a legend can be born. For Hera, this act of vengeance was her most terrible success. For Heracles, it was his most terrible wound. But for those who tell the story, it became the hinge upon which his entire life turned. The labors awaited him, the battles and triumphs that would define his name. And yet, no matter how many monsters he killed, no matter how many victories he won, the memory of this madness would linger. It was the one battle he could never truly escape, the battle within his own soul. After the madness had passed, Heracles stood among the ruins of his life. The laughter of his children was silenced forever, the warmth of his family extinguished by his own hands. The weight of grief pressed upon him, heavier than any boulder he had ever lifted. No monster, no warrior, no army could have broken him in this way. And yet, the gods had seen fit, through Hera's vengeance, to leave him with a burden that could never truly be set down. For a time, Heracles wandered, searching for some sense of meaning, some way to cleanse the stain upon his soul. In Greek thought, a man guilty of bloodshed was polluted, tainted in a way that offended both mortals and gods alike. It was not enough to grieve. It was not enough to repent. Purification was required. And so Heracles turned to the oracle of Delphi, the sacred voice of Apollo, who alone could speak the will of the gods. The oracle listened to his plea. Heracles did not hide what he had done. He confessed the blood of his children, his horror at the act, and his desperate longing for absolution. The answer he received was not gentle. Apollo declared that Heracles must serve Eurystheus, the king of Tiryns and Mycenae, for a set number of years. In that time, he would be assigned tasks, impossible tasks, that would test his strength, his endurance, and his will. Only by completing these labors would Heracles find purification, and perhaps some measure of redemption. And so began the famous cycle known as the 12 labors of Heracles. Each labor was designed to be more difficult than the last, pushing him to the edge of what even a demigod could endure. Some say Hera herself influenced Eurystheus, guiding him to select the most punishing and humiliating tasks. In this way, her vengeance continued, forcing Heracles into endless struggle, never allowing him rest or peace. The first labor was to slay the Nemean lion, a beast of monstrous size and strength. Its hide was impervious to weapons, and no blade or arrow could pierce it. Hunters had tried and failed, villages lived in fear, and the land was terrorized by the creature's hunger. When Heracles confronted it, he discovered quickly that his arrows bounced harmlessly from its golden fur. And so, in a test not of cunning but of raw strength, he wrestled the lion with his bare hands, strangling it until life left its body. Even this was not enough, for when he tried to skin it, no knife could cut through the pelt. At last, he used the beast's own claws to strip its hide, a detail the Greeks relished as a symbol of resourcefulness amid struggle. From that day forward, Heracles wore the lion's skin as armor and its gaping jaws as a helmet, a grim reminder of his first triumph. The second labor took him to Lerna, where a serpent-headed creature known as the Hydra dwelled. This was no ordinary beast. For every head he cut off, 2 more would sprout in its place. The swamp around it was filled with poisonous fumes, choking and deadly. As he struggled, he realized that brute force alone would not suffice. With the help of his nephew, Iolaus, he devised a strategy. As each head was severed, Iolaus cauterized the wound with a burning torch, preventing new growth. In time, the Hydra fell. But Hera, ever watchful, sent a giant crab to harass him during the fight, and when Heracles triumphed, she placed the crab among the stars as the constellation Cancer, a reminder that even in defeat, she would find ways to leave her mark. The third labor demanded that he capture the Cyrenian hind, a deer sacred to Artemis. This was not a task of violence, but of patience. The hind was swift, its hooves like flashes of gold, and for a full year Heracles pursued it across mountains and rivers, never tiring, never relenting. At last, he captured the creature unharmed, showing not only strength but endurance and respect. When Artemis confronted him, furious that her sacred animal had been taken, Heracles explained his quest, and she allowed him to continue. This labor revealed another truth, that redemption required more than brute force. It required restraint, humility, and perseverance. The fourth labor tested him against the Erymanthian boar, a monstrous beast that terrorized the countryside. Here again, Heracles showed cleverness as well as strength. He chased the boar into deep snow, slowing its massive bulk until it could be captured alive. When he brought it back to Eurystheus, the cowardly king was so terrified that he hid inside a bronze jar, refusing to face the creature. The Greeks delighted in this image, Heracles triumphant, his so-called master cowering in fear, a reminder that strength and courage often belonged not to kings, but to those who served them. Each of these first 4 labors reflected a different quality: strength in the lion, strategy in the hydra, endurance in the hind, and cunning in the capture of the boar. Yet behind them all loomed the shadow of Hera. For she had not ended her vengeance with the madness. Instead, she extended it into these trials, ensuring that Heracles's life would be one of endless struggle. Each task was a reminder of what he had lost, of the peace that would never return to him. And so, as the hero undertook these labors, the story of Heracles shifted. He was no longer simply a man of strength, or a victim of divine cruelty. He became a figure of resilience, a symbol of what it means to endure suffering and yet continue onward. His labors were not only punishments, they were also paths toward greatness, transforming his grief into legend. For those who listen to these tales by firelight, or who hear them now in the quiet hours of the night, the message was clear: life is not free from pain, and even the strongest must suffer. But suffering can be endured, and in enduring, one might find a kind of immortality, not in the body, but in memory, in story, in the echoes passed down through time. Thus, the labors of Heracles began, born of tragedy, shaped by Hera's vengeance, and carried out under the weight of grief. Each trial would test him, each trial would scar him, and yet each trial would bring him closer to the destiny that awaited, the greatest of Greek heroes, the man who struggled not only against monsters, but against fate itself. The labors of Heracles did not end with lions, serpents, hinds, or boars. Those were only the beginning, a prelude to even greater trials. Each new task carried with it fresh dangers and greater humiliation, for Hera's hand still guided Eurystheus, whispering in his ear, shaping every assignment into a punishment worthy of her vengeance. Heracles was not merely to be tested, he was to be humbled, wearied, and forced into endless struggle. And yet, through these very struggles, his legend only grew. The fifth labor sent him to cleanse the Augean stables, a challenge not of combat but of degradation. King Augeas of Elis possessed vast herds of cattle, and their stables had not been cleaned in many years. The filth had piled high, a mountain of stench and decay that seemed beyond remedy. Eurystheus hoped to humiliate Heracles, to force the mighty hero into labor fit for slaves. At first glance, it seemed an impossible task. But Heracles, ever resourceful, diverted the courses of two nearby rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, sending their waters rushing through the stables. In a single day, the filth was washed away. The task was completed, not by brute strength, but by cleverness and a willingness to endure even the most degrading of assignments. Yet Eurystheus, manipulated by Hera, refused to count the labor, claiming Heracles had cheated by using the rivers. Thus, his suffering was prolonged, his victories diminished. The sixth labor brought him to the Stymphalian marsh, where a flock of deadly birds resided. These were no ordinary birds. They possessed beaks of bronze, sharp feathers they could hurl like arrows, and a taste for human flesh. Their cries echoed like weapons in the air, filling the marsh with terror. Hera had nurtured these creatures, feeding them until their numbers grew uncontrollable. Heracles arrived at the swamp, surrounded by water and reeds, unsure how to draw them out. Then, gifted by Athena, he received a pair of bronze castanets crafted by Hephaestus. Their clashing noise startled the birds, sending them into the air in confusion. One by one, Heracles loosed his arrows, striking them from the sky until the marsh was safe again. In this labor, strength was matched with divine assistance, a reminder that not all gods stood against him. While Hera tormented, others offered aid. Next came the Cretan bull, a mighty beast said to breathe fire, father to the Minotaur of later myths. The bull had been sent by Poseidon, meant as a gift to King Minos, but when the king defied the god, it was cursed with rage and fury, roaming the island in destruction. Heracles was commanded to subdue it alive. Wrestling the creature with his bare hands, he pinned its massive form and dragged it back to Eurystheus. But the king, cowardly as always, hid at the sight of it, declaring that the bull be released. It ran free, later to cause havoc in Marathon, leaving behind another story in the ever-expanding web of Greek myth. Hera must have smiled at this chaos, for even in Heracles's victories, destruction seemed to ripple outward. The eighth labor took Heracles to Thrace, to capture the mares of Diams. These horses were no ordinary animals, but flesh-eating beasts, fed by their master upon the bodies of strangers and prisoners. The land of Thrace was harsh, its people warlike, and Diams himself was a cruel king, beloved of Mars, the god of war. Heracles confronted Diams, defeated him in battle, and in some versions of the story, fed the tyrant to his own mares, quenching their hunger on the flesh of their master. Once subdued, the mares were brought back to Eurystheus. Yet the stench of blood and cruelty lingered, a reminder of the darkness threaded through these tasks. The ninth labor was perhaps even stranger. Heracles was commanded to retrieve the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. The Amazons were fierce warrior women, skilled in battle and loyal to their queen. At first, Hippolyta greeted Heracles kindly, offering him the belt as a gift, impressed by his strength and honor. But Hera would not allow the labor to be so simple. She spread rumors among the Amazons that Heracles intended to abduct their queen, that he came not as a guest but as a conqueror. Distrust and anger spread quickly, and soon the Amazons charged into battle. In the chaos, Heracles fought them fiercely, and though accounts vary, most versions end with Hippolyta slain, her gift taken by force. Once more, Hera turned potential peace into bloodshed, twisting even generosity into violence. Each labor carried its own lesson, its own tone. The lion had tested strength, the hydra strategy, the hind patience, the boar cunning, the stable's humiliation, the bird's resourcefulness, the bull endurance, the mare's cruelty, and the Amazon's trust. Threaded through them all was Hera's quiet hand, ensuring that even when Heracles succeeded, the path was strewn with suffering. She would not permit him simple victories, nor allow him peace in accomplishment. Yet paradoxically, her vengeance gave rise to his greatness. The Greeks told these stories not merely as accounts of punishment, but as parables of resilience. They saw in Heracles a man who endured what no one else could endure, who bore burdens placed upon him by divine malice, and who, even in humiliation, found ways to triumph. It was not the tasks themselves that mattered, but the endurance with which he faced them. Hera sought to break him, but in her relentless efforts, she forged his legend. As we let these tales settle in the quiet of the night, we sense their rhythm, trial after trial, challenge after challenge, each one a wave crashing upon the same unyielding shore. Hercules, though battered, remained standing. His strength was unmatched, his will unbroken. Hera, though cunning and merciless, could never end him, only shape his journey. And so the labors continued, each one a step deeper into the fabric of myth, each one a reminder that suffering and greatness are often bound together, inseparable, woven into the same thread of destiny. The story of Hercules' labors reached its climax in the final and most harrowing tasks. By this time, he had faced lions, serpents, birds, bulls, mares, and amazons. He had cleansed stables, bent rivers to his will, and endured humiliation after humiliation at the hands of Eurystheus and the guiding malice of Hera. Yet the labors were not finished. The most dangerous trials still lay before him, tasks that would take him to the edge of the world, into realms of shadow and death, where no mortal had ever dared to go. The 10th labor sent him west, to the land of the setting sun, where he was commanded to steal the cattle of Geryon. Geryon was no ordinary man, but a monstrous giant with 3 bodies joined at the waist, 3 heads, and the strength of many warriors. His cattle were guarded by a fearsome 2-headed dog, Orthrus, and by the vigilant herdsman Eurytion. To reach them, Hercules had to cross vast distances, traveling through lands unknown. Along the way, he raised great pillars at the narrow straits between Europe and Africa, the place now known as the Pillars of Hercules, which the Greeks saw as the very edges of the world. When he reached Geryon's domain, Hercules battled Orthrus and the herdsman, defeating them swiftly. But Geryon himself proved a formidable opponent. With his 3 bodies and 3 sets of arms, he seemed almost invincible. Hercules drew his bow, loosing a poisoned arrow that struck Geryon down. With the giant slain, he gathered the cattle and drove them back across the sea and land, all the way to Eurystheus. Yet the journey was not without hardship. Hera, relentless as ever, sent swarms of gadflies to torment the cattle, scattering them across the fields, forcing Hercules to chase and gather them again and again. Even in success, she ensured that he would know frustration, that his triumph would be shadowed by toil. The 11th labor took him still farther, to the far reaches of the earth where the Hesperides dwelled. These maidens, daughters of the night, tended a garden of golden apples, gifts of Gaia to Hera upon her marriage to Zeus. It was, perhaps, the most sacred of Hera's treasures. Guarded by the Hesperides and by the serpent Ladin, who coiled endlessly around the tree, the apples could not be taken by mortal hands. Hercules faced not only the serpent but the difficulty of even finding the hidden garden, which lay at the western edge of the world. His journey to the Hesperides was filled with strange encounters. He wrestled the sea god Nereus, forcing him to reveal the way. He crossed lands where the sun beat harshly upon the earth. At one point, he met Prometheus, still bound to the rocks, his liver devoured daily by Zeus's eagle. Out of pity, Hercules slew the eagle, granting Prometheus some measure of release, a deed that showed not only his strength but his compassion. At last, Hercules reached the garden. But the task was not so simple as seizing the apples. Some versions tell that he asked Atlas, the Titan who bore the weight of the heavens upon his shoulders, for help. Atlas, grateful for the temporary freedom, agreed to fetch the apples while Hercules held up the heavens in his place. Imagine the strain of that moment, Hercules, already weary from so many trials, standing beneath the vault of the sky, the entire cosmos pressing down upon him. Yet he bore it, unyielding. When Atlas returned with the apples, he tried to leave Hercules with the burden. But with clever words, Hercules tricked him into taking the sky once more, escaping with the prize in hand. In this labor, not only his strength but his wit preserved him. The 12th and final labor was the most fearsome of all, to descend into the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of Hades. No mortal had ever entered the realm of the dead and returned alive. It was a task that seemed to defy nature itself. Yet Hercules, undaunted, traveled to the gates of Hades, guided by the mysteries of the gods. There he encountered shades and spirits, the whispers of the dead echoing all around him. He spoke with Hades and Persephone themselves, asking permission to take Cerberus. The rulers of the underworld agreed, but only on one condition: he must subdue the hound without weapons. Cerberus was no ordinary guardian. With 3 snapping heads, a serpent's tail, and a manner of writhing snakes, he was terror incarnate. And yet, Heracles approached him with the same strength and courage that had carried him through every other trial. He wrestled the beast, grappling with its immense bulk, enduring its snapping jaws and lashing tail. At last, he forced it into submission, dragging it up from the darkness into the world of the living. When Eurystheus beheld the monster, his fear was so great that he hid once more in his bronze jar, begging Heracles to return it to Hades. And so, with Cerberus delivered and returned, the 12 labors were complete. Heracles had endured the impossible, faced terrors no other mortal would dare to confront, and emerged victorious each time. Yet these triumphs had not been victories of joy. They were victories of endurance, of survival against the odds, each one shaped by the cruelty of Hera's vengeance. She had sought to humiliate him, to break him, to grind his spirit beneath endless struggle. Instead, she had created a hero whose name would echo through eternity. For the Greeks, the labors of Heracles were more than stories of monsters and tasks. They were metaphors for the trials of life itself. Each of us, in our way, faces lions to wrestle, serpents to outwit, burdens to endure, and shadows to confront. Each of us knows the weight of suffering and the hope of redemption. Heracles' story was not only about strength of the body, it was about strength of the soul, the ability to endure even when the gods themselves seemed against you. And so, as the tale of the labors closes, we are left with an image both powerful and poignant: a man shaped by tragedy, guided by vengeance, and tested beyond measure, yet still standing. Hera had sought to destroy him, but in the end, she had only ensured that his legend would never die. The completion of the 12 labors should have marked the end of Heracles' torment. He had done the impossible, slain monsters, wrestled giants, bent rivers to his will, even descended into the underworld itself. Few mortals, few demigods, few even among the gods, could boast of such feats. One might imagine that after such trials, peace would at last be his reward. But in the world of Greek myth, peace rarely follows triumph. Hera's shadow, though her grandest vengeance seemed fulfilled, still stretched across the path of Heracles' life. Eurystheus had released him from servitude, and yet the memory of humiliation lingered. Heracles was no longer bound by tasks, but he carried within him the weariness of endless struggle. Even free, he could not escape Hera's designs, for her enmity did not simply end with the labors. It slipped into other corners of his story, shaping his later deeds, his friendships, his marriages, and his fate. One way Hera's influence persisted was through the very reputation Heracles had earned. His labors had made him famous, celebrated across Greece, admired by kings and feared by foes. Yet this fame also brought envy, rivalry, and endless new conflicts. Wherever Heracles went, his name preceded him, and with it came expectations. He was no longer allowed to be simply a man. He was the hero of the labors, the slayer of beasts, the chosen instrument of impossible deeds. And so, whenever a new problem arose, be it a marauding monster, a threatening enemy, or even the quarrels of kings, Heracles was called upon. Each summons pulled him back into danger, back into bloodshed, back into the cycle of violence that Hera had set in motion. It is telling that even in stories beyond the labors, Hera's malice surfaces. Consider, for example, the tragic tale of Heracles and Iole. The hero won her hand in an archery contest, but her father refused to grant her to him, fearing Heracles' strength and his reputation for destruction. In his anger, Heracles took vengeance upon the man, killing him and laying waste to his city. This act, born partly of pride and partly of his restless spirit, seemed to echo the madness Hera had once inflicted upon him. Though she had not sent madness directly this time, the pattern of wrath, violence, and ruin remained, seeds she had planted earlier, now blooming in his character. Heracles' second wife, Deianira, offers another glimpse of Hera's lingering influence. Their union began with yet another act of conflict. Heracles fought and killed the river god Achelous to win her hand. Later, when the centaur Nessus attempted to abduct Deianira, Heracles slew him with a poisoned arrow. But in his dying breath, Nessus tricked Deianira, telling her that his blood could be used as a charm to secure Heracles' love. She kept it, believing it to be a token of devotion, never suspecting it was laced with the Hydra's venom from Heracles' arrow. Years later, when she feared she was losing Heracles' heart, she used it, unwittingly setting the stage for his ultimate downfall. Though Nessus spoke the fatal words, it is difficult not to feel Hera's hand guiding the strands of this tale. She had created the poison through the Hydra, she had planted the seeds of tragedy through Heracles' restless heart, and she had shaped his destiny so that peace in marriage could never be simple. In this way, even when she did not appear, her influence lingered, subtle yet devastating. Another sign of Hera's lingering vengeance was the way Heracles' life remained filled with wandering and exile. After many of his deeds, he was forced to leave the cities he saved, either because of the destruction left in his wake or because of the fear his presence inspired. Kings admired his power, but they also distrusted him, unwilling to keep such a volatile figure near. The Greeks, who so loved the stories of heroes, understood this paradox. Heracles was both savior and danger, both protector and destroyer. Hera had ensured this duality. By twisting his strength into madness and then binding him to endless labor, she had made it so that no matter where he went, he carried both glory and ruin. It is here, in this middle span of Heracles' life, that we sense a quieter but deeper form of Hera's vengeance. She no longer needed to send serpents, madness, or gadflies. She had already shaped his destiny so completely that his own fame became its own prison. Every triumph led to another trial, every joy was shadowed by loss, every marriage touched by tragedy. He could never fully escape the cycle she had begun. And yet, for the listener drifting into rest, there is another way to see this. Hera's vengeance, though merciless, gave rise to the very qualities that made Heracles immortal in memory. Without her hatred, perhaps he would have lived a quiet life, known only in one corner of Greece, remembered as a strong man but nothing more. It was her cruelty that made him legendary, her hostility that carved his name into the fabric of myth. By trying to erase him, she ensured that he would never be forgotten. The Greeks, with their gift for paradox, understood this well. They saw in Hera's vengeance both destruction and creation. They knew that pain could forge greatness, that suffering could give rise to endurance, and that even the cruelty of the gods might produce stories that outlasted marble and bronze. Heracles' life, scarred though it was, became a mirror for the struggles of all humankind, to bear hardship, to endure injustice, and to keep moving forward even when peace seems forever beyond reach. So, after the labors, we find Heracles not in rest but in motion, wandering, fighting, loving, and losing, each step still shadowed by Hera's unseen hand. His battles became smaller in scale yet no less tragic, his joys always brief, his sufferings long. In every corner of his life, her vengeance lingered, not always in open fury but in the quiet, inexorable shaping of his destiny. After the completion of the 12 labors, Heracles should have found a measure of peace. Yet life continued to draw him into conflict, sorrow, and wandering. Among the most poignant chapters of his later life was his marriage to Deianira, a woman whose fate would become intertwined with his in a way both tender and tragic. Their story, like so much of Heracles' life, became another thread in the tapestry of Hera's vengeance, woven quietly, subtly, but with devastating effect. Deianira was the daughter of Aeneas, king of Calydon, and she came into Heracles' life through a trial of love and violence. Before he could win her hand, Heracles had to face another challenge, to defeat the river god Achilles, who also sought her as a bride. Their contest took the form of a wrestling match, fierce and prolonged, the god shifting into serpents and bulls, his power tested against Heracles' own. In the end, Heracles prevailed, breaking Achilles' horn and claiming Deianira as his prize. This victory, like so many of his deeds, came at a cost, another life taken, another act of force that reinforced the pattern of tragedy in his story. Their marriage was celebrated, and for a time, it seemed Heracles might know joy again. Deianira bore him children, and there were years of peace between his labors and his wandering. But peace is fragile in the life of a hero marked by vengeance. Hera's influence was never far away. Though she no longer sent beasts or madness, she had already set into motion the conditions that would undo him. That undoing came through the centaur Nessus, a figure whose story carries both warning and cruelty. Nessus served as a ferryman, guiding travelers across the river Evenus. When Heracles and Deianira came to the river, Nessus offered to carry Deianira across, but midway, he attempted to abduct her, driven by desire and deceit. Heracles, with his unmatched strength, struck him with a poisoned arrow, an arrow dipped in the venom of the Hydra from the second labor. The poison was slow, excruciating, and fatal. As Nessus lay dying on the riverbank, he seized his final moment to weave a last deceit. With the cunning of the dying, Nessus told Deianira that his blood, mixed with his own poison, was a charm that could secure her husband's love forever. "If you fear losing him," he said, "anoint his garments with my blood, and he will never stray from you." It was a lie, but it planted a seed of tragedy. Deianira believed him, and she kept the centaur's blood, not knowing it was also a deadly venom. She kept it as a token of love and protection, not a weapon of doom. This small act of faith would become the instrument of Hera's final vengeance. For Hera, who had long sought to ruin Heracles, no opportunity was more perfect than this quiet poisoning of his heart. She did not need to strike directly, she could let him be undone by the very trust he inspired in those who loved him. In this way, her vengeance became subtler, more insidious. It was no longer the thunder of monsters or the madness of gods, but a quiet betrayal hidden within affection and care. Time passed, and Heracles continued his journeys, carrying Deianira and his children with him. Yet the shadow of Hera's curse hung over them still. The goddess waited, patient as ever, until the moment when her vengeance would be complete. That moment came when Deianira feared she was losing Heracles's love. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps it was jealousy, perhaps it was the whisper of Hera herself stirring doubt in her heart. Whatever the cause, Deianira took the centaur's blood and anointed a robe for her husband, believing it to be a charm of fidelity. When Heracles donned the robe, the venom within it took its toll. It clung to his skin like fire, burning with a pain that no mortal could endure. The poison spread through his body, and there was no cure. Heracles realized, too late, the truth of what had been done to him. He knew Deianira had acted out of love, and yet he also understood that her love had been turned into a weapon against him. This was Hera's final triumph, not a battle fought in the open, but a quiet destruction that came from within. In agony, Heracles sought to end his life before the poison could consume him entirely. He built a funeral pyre on Mount Oeta, calling upon his friends and allies to bear witness. As flames rose, he bound himself to the stake, not as a victim, but as a man taking control of his fate. In his last moments, he was said to have spoken words of forgiveness, of acceptance, of release. And as the fire consumed him, something extraordinary happened. Zeus, moved by his suffering and his deeds, granted him immortality, carrying him to Olympus to live among the gods. Even in death, Hera's vengeance was complete, for the pain of Heracles's final hours was a testament to her cruelty. Yet paradoxically, his death became part of his legend. In the quiet of myth, his suffering was transformed into glory. He was not merely a mortal who had endured unimaginable trials, he became an immortal hero, a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and the strange interplay between vengeance and destiny. For those who listen to his story at the edge of sleep, Heracles's final labor is not only a tale of suffering, but also a caution. It is a reminder that even acts of love can be twisted by deception, that even the strongest can be undone by subtle poison, and that vengeance is a force that can echo far beyond the moment of anger. Hera's wrath did not end with her storms and beasts. It endured quietly, in blood and in trust, shaping the last chapter of the greatest of Greek heroes. As we leave this part of Heracles's journey, the lesson lingers softly in the mind, like the last whisper of a dream. Vengeance may destroy, but it can also immortalize. Hera's cruelty forged the hero not only in struggle but in tragedy, ensuring that his name would echo through time. And thus, Heracles became more than man, he became legend. The death of Heracles was not the end of his story. In Greek thought, death was not always a final chapter. For those who had walked extraordinary paths, whose lives were shaped by both suffering and glory, there could be transformation beyond mortality. This is the meaning of apotheosis, the moment when a mortal rises to the divine. And for Heracles, apotheosis was not only a reward, but the last stage of Hera's vengeance, a paradox of suffering and immortality intertwined. As the flames of the funeral pyre rose around him on Mount Oeta, Heracles endured pain unlike any he had known before. The poison of Nessus burned through him, a fire that would not be quenched, a wound that could not be healed. Yet in that agony, there was also resolution. The hero who had spent his life confronting monsters, defying gods, and enduring trials now faced death with the same steadfast courage that had carried him through all his labors. The story tells that Zeus, moved by Heracles' trials and the injustice of Hera's vengeance, sent his own hand to rescue him. From Olympus, the king of the gods descended, taking Heracles' mortal form into the divine realm. The mortal man, scarred, weary, and tested beyond measure, was stripped of his human suffering and clothed in divinity. In that moment, Heracles became no longer a man, but a god of strength, endurance, and courage, a living reminder that even the cruelest vengeance could not destroy him entirely. This transformation was more than a reward. It was a profound statement within Greek mythology. Suffering could be sanctified, endurance could be exalted, and vengeance could be transformed into glory. Heracles' mortal life, marked by tragedy, madness, and endless struggle, became the foundation for his divine immortality. His apotheosis was the final act of the story Hera had shaped. She had tried to destroy him, to break him with grief, humiliation, and relentless challenge. And yet, through her vengeance, she had forged a hero worthy of Olympus. Hera's role in this final transformation is complex. In one sense, her hatred had driven Heracles to endure suffering greater than any other hero. Her labors were not simply trials of strength, they were trials of the soul. She had fashioned a journey in which each victory came with pain, each triumph with loss. But in doing so, she had created a figure who embodied the highest ideals of heroism. The endurance of Heracles became a testament to human and divine capacity for resilience. Even her cruelty, in its own way, shaped his immortality. The Greeks, in their stories, often spoke of Heracles' apotheosis with reverence and wonder. He was welcomed into Olympus, granted a place among the gods, given a seat at their divine table. His mortal wounds were healed, his burdens removed, and yet the memory of his trials remained. Even as a god, he carried the scars of his labors, reminders that immortality does not erase suffering, but transforms it into something greater. Among the gods, Heracles was no longer simply the strongest man, he was the god who had endured the impossible. He became a protector, a patron for those who faced great trials, a figure to whom mortals could look in moments of struggle. In some versions of the myth, Hera herself ceased her hostility after his apotheosis, offering a kind of quiet acknowledgement of his endurance. Whether she relented or continued her opposition in subtle ways, Heracles had transcended the cycle she had bound him to. His destiny was no longer hers to control. In his divine form, Heracles was celebrated not only for his strength, but for his suffering. His story became a parable for humanity, that the path to greatness is forged through trials, that endurance in the face of hardship shapes the soul, and that even cruelty and vengeance can lead to transformation. His life was proof that suffering was not meaningless, but could be transmuted into honor, glory, and lasting legacy. For those who hear his tale at the edge of sleep, Heracles' apotheosis offers a quiet kind of comfort. It reminds us that even the hardest trials can lead to something greater, that suffering need not end in destruction, and that endurance can become a form of transcendence. His journey, shaped by Hera's vengeance, marked by pain, and sealed by immortality, becomes a myth not only of conflict, but of transformation. And so Heracles took his place among the gods, his mortal labors complete, yet still alive in memory and story. His name became eternal, his deeds a source of inspiration for generations. Hera's vengeance had been relentless, shaping every step of his journey, but in the end it became part of his legend. Heracles did not simply survive her cruelty, he rose above it. He became something greater than man, something immortal. The apotheosis of Heracles is the final paradox of his story. It is both the end of his suffering and the fulfillment of it, the reward born from the very trials that had been designed to break him. Hera had sought to destroy him, but in doing so, she ensured that he would never be forgotten. Heracles, the man who endured madness, monsters, humiliation, and loss, became a god, a testament to the power of endurance, the endurance of power, and the strange gift hidden within vengeance itself. As we drift deeper into rest, this final truth lingers softly in the mind, that even in suffering there can be transformation, that even in cruelty there can be greatness, and that even the hardest trials can lead to a kind of immortality. For Heracles, Hera's vengeance was the forge. And from that forge emerged not only a hero, but a god. Heracles's life did not end with his apotheosis. Though he became a god, his story lived on, woven into the very fabric of Greek culture and imagination. His name became more than a legend, it became a symbol, a mirror reflecting the human condition. And yet, at the heart of his legacy lay not only his own deeds, but the quiet, enduring hand of Hera's vengeance. Without her wrath, Heracles's story would be very different. It is in this legacy, shaped by conflict and suffering, that we come to understand the deeper truth of myth. Hera's influence in shaping Heracles's fate ensured that his story was not one of simple triumph. It was a story of struggle without end, of victories that came at great cost, of glory mingled with pain. The 12 labors themselves, and the tragedies that followed, became the blueprint of his legend. They were not just heroic feats, they were lessons in endurance, framed by the cruel necessity of suffering. In telling his story, the Greeks preserved both his strength and the trials that tested it, binding them together into a myth that endures even today. Heracles became, in a way, the embodiment of the human struggle. He was not a flawless god, nor a simple hero. He was a man who faced overwhelming trials, who bore humiliation, who endured madness, and who yet continued forward. His life reminded mortals that true heroism was not measured by victory alone, but by the willingness to rise again after every defeat. And so his legend became part of the moral fabric of Greek culture, a lesson in endurance passed down through generations. The shadow of Hera's vengeance is written into this legacy. It was her cruelty that made his story so profound, her hatred that shaped him into a figure who could endure anything. Without her, Heracles's path might have been shorter, easier, perhaps even forgotten. Her vengeance gave him not only his greatest trials but also the depth of character that made him immortal. In every telling of his story, Hera's influence lingers, a reminder that even the gods' quarrels can leave a lasting mark on the world of mortals. In the centuries that followed, Heracles became one of the most enduring figures in myth, literature, and art. His 12 labors became archetypes for heroism. His struggles with the lion, the hydra, the stables, and the underworld became metaphors for the battles we all face, within ourselves and in the world. His suffering became a symbol that greatness often comes at a cost, that endurance requires sacrifice, and that vengeance can shape destiny in ways we cannot escape. Artists and poets across the centuries returned to his story again and again. In sculpture, Heracles is often shown at the height of his labors, muscles taut, face calm yet determined, his gaze fixed beyond the moment of pain. In poetry, his deeds become lessons and parables, reminding listeners that suffering need not be meaningless. Even philosophers saw in his story something more profound, a symbol of human resilience, of a soul forged by struggle, shaped by opposition, and transformed by trial. Hera's role in shaping Heracles's legacy is rarely forgotten. She remains one of the most powerful figures in his myth, not as a passive observer, but as a force that propelled him toward greatness. Her wrath became a kind of shadow companion to Heracles, a silent presence in every chapter of his life. In this way, their story became more than a tale of one man. It became a story about the relationship between struggle and destiny, between cruelty and creation, between vengeance and immortality. For those who listen to his story as they drift toward sleep, the legacy of Heracles offers both comfort and warning. It comforts by reminding us that endurance can lead to transcendence, that even the harshest trials can be overcome, and that greatness can be born from suffering. It warns us that vengeance, whether mortal or divine, has a power that can extend far beyond its intended moment, shaping lives and legends for generations to come. Heracles's name became a symbol for endurance, his life a parable for the human journey. His labors became a blueprint for heroism. And Hera's vengeance became a testament to the strange power of opposition, that even cruelty can produce something lasting, something immortal. Their story became a reminder that the world is shaped not only by those who triumph but by those who challenge them, and that every act of hatred or vengeance carries the seed of transformation. In the quiet hours before sleep, the story of Hercules and Hera becomes more than myth, it becomes a meditation. It is a story about the cost of greatness, the nature of vengeance, and the endurance of the human spirit. It is a story that reminds us that every trial we face has meaning, and that even in pain there is the possibility of transcendence. And so Hercules' legacy lives on. He is more than a figure of strength. He is a symbol of resilience. His name is a whisper through the ages, a reminder that suffering, endurance, and even vengeance are threads in the same fabric of life. Hera's wrath shaped him, and in shaping him, she shaped the memory of heroism itself. As we settle deeper into quiet rest, we carry this thought with us: Hercules did not live in vain. His life, his suffering, and his immortality are proof that even the hardest journey can become a story worth telling for eternity. The story of Hercules and Hera did not end with the myths of ancient Greece. Though centuries have passed since poets first told of the 12 labors and the goddess's relentless vengeance, their tale continues to echo in the modern world. In art, literature, psychology, and even popular culture, the struggles of Hercules and the quiet cruelty of Hera live on. They remind us that myths are not only old stories. They are living mirrors of human nature, reflections that adapt to each age, carrying truths across time. In the modern imagination, Hercules remains one of the most enduring symbols of heroism. His story is not simply a tale of strength, it is a story of perseverance. It resonates with anyone who has faced hardship and sought to rise above it. In psychology, Hercules has become a metaphor for the human condition, representing the inner struggle we all face. The 12 labors are sometimes seen as archetypes of challenges we encounter in life, tests of courage, endurance, humility, and resilience. His journey continues to be told because it speaks to a universal truth, that life itself can be a series of labors, and that the measure of a person lies in their willingness to endure them. Hera's role in the myth also lives on, though in a quieter, subtler way. She is remembered not only as a goddess of the divine pantheon but as an archetype of opposition, resistance, and consequence. In modern interpretations, she becomes a symbol of the forces that stand against us, whether those forces are external challenges, internal doubts, or the quiet weight of fate. Her relentless opposition to Hercules reflects the reality that struggle often comes not only from what we face in the world but from what lies within us and the people around us. Artists and storytellers have continued to return to this dynamic between Hercules and Hera. In literature, their story has inspired countless retellings, novels, plays, and poems that revisit their conflict, each offering new interpretations. In cinema and television, Hercules often appears as the archetypal hero, his labors reimagined for modern audiences. Hera, too, appears in different guises, from the scheming antagonist to the embodiment of necessary challenge, the force that ensures the hero's journey has meaning. These adaptations remind us that myths live by their adaptability, transforming to fit each generation's questions about fate, strength, and justice. Even in everyday life, the echoes of their story can be found. The name Herculean has entered our language as shorthand for any task of immense difficulty. We speak of Herculean effort not only because of the feats of the hero, but because of the enduring legacy of the labors. In this way, Hercules lives in our words, shaping how we think about struggle and endurance. Likewise, Hera's role, though less spoken of, survives in the way we understand opposition. She is a reminder that no great achievement comes without challenge, that every triumph carries within it the seeds of conflict. In modern psychology, the story of Hercules and Hera also offers insight into human relationships. Hera's opposition to Hercules can be read as a symbol of the inevitable trials we encounter in life, often from those closest to us. Her vengeance reminds us that conflict can be deeply personal and enduring. For individuals, it suggests that struggle is not only external but relational, woven into the fabric of human connections and the complexities of love, jealousy, and pride. Their story also continues to inspire philosophical reflection. Many thinkers have looked to Heracles as a symbol of resilience, endurance, and the human capacity for transformation. His life is often seen as proof that suffering can be meaningful, that trials, no matter how painful, can shape us into something greater. And Hera's role reminds us that opposition, even when cruel, can be a catalyst for growth. In this sense, their story is not just a tale of the past, it is a living lesson for the present, offering insight into the challenges we face and the strength we need to meet them. Even in the quiet art of storytelling before sleep, their myth has found a place. Channels that tell stories for relaxation or bedtime often draw on Heracles and Hera, not simply for the drama of their conflict, but for the deeper rhythm of the story, the way it unfolds like a long dream, filled with trials, transformation, and meaning. It is a tale that invites listeners to reflect on their own journeys, to see themselves in the struggles and triumphs of the hero, and perhaps to find comfort in the knowledge that endurance can lead to something greater. In this way, Heracles and Hera live on, not as distant figures of a bygone age, but as archetypes that speak to the human heart. Their story continues to be retold, not because it belongs only to the Greeks, but because it belongs to all of us. It is a story of strength and suffering, of vengeance and transformation, of the trials that define us. And it is a story that reminds us, in the quiet moments before sleep, that the struggles we face today are part of a much older story, a story as old as humanity itself. As we let the tale of Heracles and Hera rest in our minds, we begin to see that their legacy is not just about ancient myth. It is about the enduring human experience, that every great story of struggle carries within it the seed of transformation, that every labor has its meaning, and that even the cruelty of vengeance can give rise to lasting greatness. The story of Heracles and Hera is, on the surface, a tale of gods and monsters, of impossible labors and divine vengeance. Yet beneath that drama lies something deeper, a hidden layer of meaning that speaks not only to the people of ancient Greece but to all who listen to the story today. Hera's relentless opposition to Heracles, and the trials it set before him, are not simply a myth about cruelty. They are a story about life itself, about challenge and endurance, about the way struggle shapes the soul. One of the clearest lessons of Heracles' story is that suffering can be transformative. The 12 labors were not merely tasks, they were trials that tested every part of him, his body, his will, his mind, and his spirit. Hera's vengeance forced him to confront dangers no mortal should endure, and yet it was in facing those dangers that Heracles became something greater. This is a lesson echoed in countless lives. Pain, loss, and hardship are not signs of failure. They are opportunities, painful as they may be, to grow, to discover hidden strengths, and to transform ourselves in ways we cannot foresee. Hera's role in this transformation is an important part of the lesson. She did not simply send monsters, she shaped a journey, one that would push Heracles beyond his limits. In life, we rarely face struggles without a deeper cause. Sometimes challenges come from forces we cannot control, from circumstances beyond our choosing. Hera's vengeance is a mythic mirror of that reality. It reminds us that hardship often comes without warning, and that the way we respond, whether with despair or with determination, becomes the measure of our character. Another hidden lesson in their story is the nature of endurance. Heracles did not succeed because he was unbroken. He succeeded because he kept moving forward despite wounds, despite humiliation, despite exhaustion. Endurance is not the absence of struggle, it is the ability to persist in spite of it. For those who listen to myths as bedtime stories, this can be a quiet comfort. It reassures us that strength is not always found in victory, but in the willingness to continue, to face the next challenge, even when the road is long and weary. Hera's vengeance also teaches us about the complexity of opposition. She was not simply an antagonist in the story, she was a force that defined Heracles' path. Without her challenges, there would have been no 12 labors, no transformation into immortality, no enduring legacy. In this way, her wrath becomes a kind of hidden gift. It is a reminder that opposition, though painful, can shape us for the better. The trials we resist most fiercely often become the ones that change us the most. This is the paradox of struggle. It can wound us, but it can also forge us. Another lesson lies in the tragedy of Heracles' later life, especially in the tale of Deianira and Nessus. Even after completing his labors, Hercules could not escape suffering. Love, too, became a trial, and trust could be betrayed. In life, we see similar patterns. No matter how much we achieve, we are never free from challenge. Relationships, desires, and choices continue to shape our fate. Hera's quiet vengeance in this later chapter of the story reminds us that life's trials do not always end with success. Sometimes they follow us in new forms, teaching us that vigilance, humility, and compassion are as important as strength. The final transformation of Hercules into a god carries its own lesson, that endurance and suffering can lead to transcendence. Apotheosis was not a reward given lightly. It was the culmination of a life lived through trial and sacrifice. It is a reminder that there is meaning in perseverance, that struggle can lead to something beyond ourselves. In this way, the story of Hercules becomes more than an ancient myth, it becomes a quiet parable for life, that pain is not wasted if we meet it with courage, and that even the cruelest forces in life can lead us to something greater. For those who drift to sleep with this story in mind, there is another hidden truth: life itself is a kind of labor. Every day brings challenges, both great and small. We face obstacles in work, in relationships, in our own minds. We may not have monsters to slay or rivers to cross, but we have struggles of our own. The story of Hercules invites us to see those struggles differently, not as curses, but as part of the shaping of our own story. To see them as opportunities to build strength, to endure, and to grow. Hera's revenge, in this sense, is a metaphor for life's inevitable trials. It teaches us that struggle is not a sign of failure, but a sign of life. Hercules did not live without opposition, and neither can we. His story tells us that how we meet our trials matters more than the trials themselves. And that even when challenge comes disguised as cruelty, it can carry within it the seeds of transformation. Perhaps the greatest hidden lesson of Hera's vengeance is that endurance creates legacy. Hercules' name endures not simply because of the strength he showed, but because of the trials he faced, the burdens he bore, and the courage with which he bore them. It is this endurance, the willingness to stand in the face of suffering, that transforms life into legend. Hera, in her own way, ensured that his name would never be forgotten. Through her opposition, she forged a story that continues to speak to us. As we draw near to sleep, this lesson rests quietly in the mind. Life is shaped not only by what happens to us, but by how we meet it. Struggle, endurance, transformation, these are the hidden truths in the story of Hercules and Hera. And in their story, we find both comfort and challenge, a reminder that every trial carries meaning, and that even the hardest paths can lead to something eternal. As the story of Hercules and Hera draws toward its close, there is a moment of quiet reflection, a moment where the noise of battles fades and we are left only with the weight of the tale itself. The labors are complete, the vengeance has been carried out, the hero has been transformed, and what remains is not simply a myth, but a testament to the power of story. It is here that we begin to see the true meaning of their saga, not as a sequence of deeds and conflicts, but as a timeless reminder of how story shapes us. In the hush of memory, Hera's role stands out, not merely as an antagonist to Hercules, but as a force that gave shape to his life and legacy. Her relentless opposition became the defining thread of his journey. She was not simply a goddess opposing a mortal hero, she was a narrative force, the tension without which the story could not exist. Without her, there would be no labors, no final sacrifice, no transformation into immortality. Hera was, in effect, the shadow that gave Hercules his light, the counterbalance that forged meaning in his struggles. Hercules, for his part, was more than muscle and bravery. His story is as much about endurance of the spirit as it is about feats of strength. He became the embodiment of the human journey, tested, wounded, challenged, yet always moving forward. His life, and the myth that grew from it, remind us that a story does not need a loud ending. Sometimes its power lies in the quiet moments, in the weight of sacrifice, in the endurance of pain, in the transformation that comes after struggle. This is where the power of storytelling becomes clear. Myths like that of Hercules and Hera endure because they speak to something essential in us all, the experience of challenge, the longing for meaning, the hope that suffering can lead to transformation. The story lives not just in the telling of events, but in the truths it carries. For those who listen in the quiet of night, these truths slip gently into the mind. They are not shouted or argued. They are whispered, like a dream, settling softly in the heart. The quiet ending of this tale is also a reflection on the nature of Hera's revenge itself. Her vengeance was not a single moment of fury, but a slow unfolding, a shaping of Hercules' life through trials, through hardship, through tragedy. It was a quiet but persistent force. And in this, there is a lesson for us all. Sometimes the most profound changes come not in storms, but in the patient shaping of time. Hera's revenge was a slow story, a quiet force that worked over years and labors, until it became part of the very essence of Hercules' life. Storytelling works in the same way. The greatest stories are not always those of instant revelation, but those that unfold gradually, revealing deeper meaning with each telling. The tale of Hercules and Hera is not simply an account of gods and labors, it is a living story that changes with every telling, growing richer in meaning as it passes from voice to voice, generation to generation. This is why myths endure. They are not fixed, they breathe, they evolve, they take root in each listener's heart. In the quiet of night, as we listen to this tale, we come to understand that the real power of the story is not in the ending, but in the journey. Hercules' life was a long journey of trials, shaped by divine opposition, transformed by endurance, and sealed by immortality. Hera's vengeance gave it shape, but the telling of it gives it life. And that telling, repeated through centuries, is what keeps the story alive. There is something deeply comforting in this thought. It means that stories, once told, never truly end. They live in memory, in culture, in art, and in the quiet mind of anyone who listens. The story of Hercules and Hera becomes part of us, not because it offers answers, but because it offers a mirror, a way to see ourselves in its struggles and its truths. For a listener drifting toward sleep, this is perhaps the quietest and most lasting part of the story, that myth is not only about gods and heroes, but about the human need to find meaning in life's trials. Hera and Hercules are not just figures of an ancient age. They are symbols, archetypes of the challenges we face and the endurance we summon. Their story is a kind of lullaby, a gentle reminder that even the hardest struggles can be transformed into something lasting and beautiful. And so the tale comes to its resting place, not with a roar or a trumpet, but with a whisper. Hera's revenge, Hercules' labors, their triumphs, tragedies, and transformations, they settle into the quiet. The story itself becomes part of a deeper truth, that life is not defined by a single battle, but by the whole unfolding of the journey. The quiet ending of this myth leaves us with a gentle thought, that stories matter. They shape how we see the world, how we see ourselves, and how we understand the trials before us. Hera's revenge shaped Hercules. His endurance shaped a legend. And that legend, in turn, shapes us. As we close the tale, the final lesson rests softly in the mind. The power of story is quiet, enduring, and infinite. It is a power that carries Hera's vengeance, Hercules' endurance, and the truths of their journey forward, into every age, and into every heart willing to listen. And so we come to the final part of this long journey, the gentle closing of the story of Hercules and Hera, a story that has taken us through thunder and challenge, cruelty and endurance, suffering and transformation. Now, as the tale draws to rest, there is no need for grand conclusions or loud declarations. The end of a story like this is a quiet moment, a soft breath after a long path, an invitation to let go and simply rest. In this quiet ending, we can hold all that we have heard as a single truth, that the life of Hercules is not a tale of perfection, but a tale of persistence. He was not without flaws. He was a hero who suffered madness, betrayal, and grief, yet he continued forward. His journey was shaped by vengeance, but also by a will to endure, a will that carried him to immortality. In this, there is something deeply human. We are all, in some way, travelers on a long road. We face burdens that test our strength, and we carry wounds that never fully heal. What matters most is the willingness to continue, step by step, day by day. Hera's role in the story reminds us that challenge is inevitable. Sometimes opposition comes in forms we cannot foresee. Sometimes it comes not as open conflict, but as quiet resistance woven into the fabric of our lives. For Heracles, Hera's vengeance was not a single act, it was a lifetime of trials, a shaping force that never let him rest. In our own lives, we encounter similar forces. Challenges can be loud or quiet, sudden or slow, but they shape us nonetheless. The story leaves us with the understanding that endurance is not the absence of challenge, but the ability to meet it with courage. As we settle deeper into rest, it becomes clear that the tale of Heracles and Hera is also a story about transformation. Through trials and suffering, Heracles moved beyond mortality. Through Hera's opposition, he became something greater than himself. And in that transformation lies a gentle lesson, that our struggles, no matter how heavy, can lead us toward something more. They can transform us, not instantly, but slowly, quietly, as we live through them. And perhaps that is the most profound lesson of all. This story, told in the stillness of night, is more than myth. It is a quiet meditation. It is a lullaby for the mind, inviting us to let go of the noise of our own struggles and to rest in the thought that endurance matters. Heracles' life was shaped by great challenges, and Hera's vengeance gave him his trial. But in the stillness at the end of his story, we see that his journey belongs not only to him, but to all of us. It is a story about the endurance of the human spirit. In telling this tale at bedtime, there is a special kind of purpose. Myths like these are not just entertainment, they are a kind of gentle teaching, a way of carrying truths into the quiet space of sleep. They remind us that the challenges of life are not random. They are part of the shape of a story. And they remind us, too, that endings are not abrupt. They arrive softly, like the close of a chapter, leaving room for reflection, rest, and renewal. The quiet closure of this myth is also an invitation to rest. Just as Heracles finally laid down his burdens and entered immortality, so too we can lay down the burdens of the day. Sleep becomes our own kind of ending, a time to set aside trials and rest. And in sleep, the lessons of the story can continue to settle quietly in the mind. They can become part of dreams, becoming whispers that speak to us in the hours before dawn. Heracles' labors, Hera's vengeance, the pain, the endurance, and the transformation, these are not left behind when the story ends. They live on quietly in memory. They live on as part of the way we see the world, as part of how we understand struggle and strength. The story becomes a gift that rests with us, an offering of peace for those who listen deeply. As we close this chapter, we are reminded that endings are not only a conclusion, but also a beginning. The end of a story opens the way for reflection. It allows us to carry forward the lessons we have heard, softly and without hurry. Heracles' journey reminds us that every life is a kind of story, shaped by trials, transformed by endurance, and carried forward in memory. And Hera's role reminds us that challenge, even when painful, can shape the meaning of the path we walk. Now, as the story draws to rest, there is nothing left but a quiet thought to carry with us. The story of Heracles and Hera is, at its heart, a story of endurance, the endurance of a hero, the endurance of a spirit, and the endurance of a story. It reminds us that life, in all its beauty and pain, is a kind of journey. A journey worth telling. A journey worth remembering. And so, as we drift toward sleep, let this quiet reflection rest in your mind, that strength is born in trial, that endurance shapes the soul, and that every story, no matter how filled with struggle, can end with peace. In this gentle closing, the myth itself becomes part of the stillness of night. It fades softly, like the last breath before sleep. Hera's vengeance becomes a quiet echo. Heracles' endurance becomes a whisper. And the story settles gently into the dream space of the mind, leaving behind the calm certainty that even in the hardest struggles, there is a kind of beauty. The quiet ending is not the end at all. It is an invitation to rest, to dream, and to carry the lesson of the story forward in the quiet hours of sleep. And now, as the last threads of our story weave themselves into stillness, we arrive at the gentle close, a space not of endings, but of quiet rest. This final section is not meant to rush you toward conclusion, but to guide you softly, like a slow breath, into the peace that follows the telling of a long and winding tale. It is a closing that carries both reflection and release, a moment to sit with the journey we have shared, the journey of Heracles, of Hera, of trials and transformation. As we rest here together, there is a deep comfort in knowing that the story has brought us not only through the labors and vengeance of gods, but also through something deeper. It has brought us to the understanding that life itself is a story. Our days are chapters, our struggles are the trials of heroes, and our endurance is the quiet thread that carries us forward. Hercules' path was shaped by suffering, yet it was through that suffering that he was transformed. In this, there is a lesson for every listener. Endurance shapes legacy, and every trial holds meaning. The quiet close of this story invites us to reflect not only on Hercules, but on ourselves. In the stillness of night, when thoughts drift toward dreams, we begin to see that our own lives echo the rhythms of myth. We face challenges, some great, some quiet, but each shapes who we are. Like Hercules, we may not have monsters to slay, but we have obstacles to meet. And like him, we have the choice of how we meet them, with strength, with endurance, and with courage. Hera's part in the story lingers here as well, not as a force to be feared, but as a reminder that challenge is part of life's fabric. Her vengeance was persistent and shaping, but it was also part of what gave Hercules his story. This is a lesson worth carrying into the quiet of sleep, that opposition, though painful, can give meaning to life. That resistance can shape us in ways we do not always understand until we look back. And that even the hardships we do not choose can become part of the story we leave behind. In this gentle closure, there is also a space to honor the power of story itself. Storytelling is more than a way to pass time. It is a way to carry truth, to shape memory, and to share wisdom. The myth of Hercules and Hera has endured for thousands of years because it speaks to something eternal. It is not a story confined to one time or place. It is a story that lives wherever there is challenge, endurance, and transformation. To listen to it is to join in a chain of listeners stretching across centuries, carrying the story forward. Now, as sleep draws nearer, this story becomes part of the quiet landscape of your mind. It settles gently, like the final notes of a song. Hercules' labors fade into calm. Hera's vengeance softens into a distant echo. And the truths of the story, about endurance, transformation, and the meaning of struggle, remain like gentle embers in the heart. They rest there quietly, ready to be drawn upon in the hours ahead. This is the gift of a story told for sleep. It does not demand attention in the waking sense. It becomes a whisper to the subconscious, a thread woven into the tapestry of dreams. In this way, the story continues to live, not only in memory, but in the quiet places where dreams are born. For Hercules, that story is immortality. For us, it can be comfort, insight, and the gentle knowledge that we are not alone in our trials. As you rest here now, let your mind drift away from the noise of the day. Let the lessons of Hercules and Hera rest softly with you. Remember that struggle is part of life, that endurance shapes the soul, and that even the cruelest challenges can give birth to meaning. These are the quiet truths the story offers, truths to carry gently, like a lullaby, into sleep. And so we close, not with finality, but with stillness. The tale of Hera's revenge and Hercules' endurance is complete for now, but the lessons and reflections it offers remain with us. They become part of the quiet mind before sleep, part of the gentle space where dreams begin. Let this closing be a moment of peace. Let it be a reminder that stories are not only told, they are lived. That the trials we face are chapters in our own journeys. And that endurance, above all, is the thread that connects us to every hero who has walked before us, and every soul who will walk after. As you lay down now, in the calm of night, take with you this quiet reflection. Life itself is a kind of bedtime story. It is filled with trials, shaped by challenge, and carried forward by endurance. And in the gentle ending of every day, there is the possibility of transformation. So rest now, gently. Let your mind drift. Let your heart settle. And let the story you have heard tonight, the story of Hercules and Hera, rest quietly within you, a soft companion in the stillness of sleep.